What is a proverb? What is a proverb? Shalom, shalom, Zion. This is Moreh Yoshiyahu Dawid of the Ark, and I'm continuing the series that is titled Raising Kings and Queens. And so we're in Proverbs, and right now we're in chapter 1. And believe it or not, I just want to deal primarily again with just one word today. So in our quick study, we're just going to be looking at this word, really the word proverb. Because we got a question we got to answer, Zion. And that is, what is a proverb? Oh no, I know what those are. Those are just little short stories. Nope. Proverbs are like, just wise sayings. Okay, that's partially true. But the question is, if you say they're just wise sayings, the question would have to be, then what is considered to be a wise saying? Because all sayings are not necessarily wise sayings. Some sayings are very foolish sayings. So you say, well, what is a proverb? And the reason that I have to bring that out is, what's the point of studying a book, the book of Proverbs, if we really don't know the real meaning of a proverb? The actual biblical meaning, not this meaning that you grew up hearing either in church or at school, because those are not the meanings of the word, I guarantee you. And as always, when we come together, my point of doing this and the purpose of doing this is to always open your eyes to the truth of Yah's word, that you might be able to see something like you've never seen it before. And in this case, you really ought to take notes, because we're going to define a word today that you've been probably hearing your whole life. And as an Israelite in this world, having no idea what this word actually means Hebraically, which is, what does it mean based on the people who actually wrote it and who used it and spoke this language. And so this is going to be our meditation. A proverb. All right. So here is the Hebrew word for proverb. It is mashal. Mashal. If you were going to write it in English, you could probably write it like this: M-A-S-H-A-L. But of course, in Hebrew, those of you who study the Hebrew language, it's mem, shin, lamed. Men, shin, lamed. And what is important about mashal that we need to know? We need to know that first and foremost, this word means to represent. I told you. When you start looking at a Hebrew and the Hebrew definitions of words versus, say, like Greek and English, it will make you always go, wait, what? Yes. So in my last video, I talked about the fact that Solomon has credentials. He's been given the greatest credential of all, is that he literally could say, King David, my daddy. I can't get too much better credentials than that, Zion. I wish I had time to go deep into that, but literally he says he's the son of David. So being the son of David gives him the credentials to give us the Proverbs, because no doubt he received these words of wisdom from his father, the king. Now he's the king, and now he's going to pass these words of wisdom down to us in form of proverbs. So the first definition is to represent. And we have a colloquial term today that we use that term. And it's very interesting because we'll say something like, okay, if you're getting ready to be in front of a lot of people, we'll just say it like this: you better represent, don't we? In other words, what we're saying is, when you get up there, wherever you are, you better be on your best behavior and act like you have some sense, and then acknowledge whatever it is, the wisdom you got, the education, the support, or whatever. You represent the people, the wisdom, the support that was behind you, that put you in a position to where you would be acknowledged. Okay, so the word represent. So now you look at the word proverb and you bring in the idea, or mashal, and the idea of represent. It starts to make more sense about what a proverb is. They're not little fairy tales. They're not like fables, like Aesop fables. It's not like little sayings of mythology. No, the Hebraic proverb were sayings of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that enabled you to properly represent Yah as his children, to represent Yah as his princes and princesses, his royal priesthood. So the very base meaning that we got today from the word proverb is to represent. We do not take Yahuwah's name in vain. Same exact mindset, same mentality. Wherever we go, we are to represent. So the question is, how do we represent? How do we show that we have had wisdom, knowledge, understanding, education, proper learning? How do we show that? Okay, that brings us to the second Hebraic definition of this word, mashal, and that means to be like. So write that down. The first definition on the surface is mashal. Of mashal is to represent. The very second idea is to be like. Okay? So mashal it represents to be like. Not necessarily just to act like, but to be like Zion. Listen. So because this, again, is coming from a king to his son, who was going to be king, it is then passed down to us, the sons and daughters of the same kings, to be like. So in the Proverbs, we see two major themes, if you would. Two major ways, two major paths of life. And of course, we know that the very first measure or a way of life manifested in this book is the way of righteousness. And that, I don't have time right now, but that has to do with the way of Hamashiach, the way of our great king. Okay? So we see the way of righteousness. And in this case, we have the Torah given to us, and then we have examples. Of course, just thinking about these examples, we'll start from Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and we can look at the ancestors of the progenitors of every tribe, and we see, when we study their lives, the times that they were being like Yah, And then the other times they were being like the nations around them. So every time they were being like Yah, it represented that they were being righteous or wise. Every time they acted like anything around them and began to behave like the nations around them, they were then considered to be wicked. And the word is either wickedness or fools. So the proverbs are set in place, number one, to represent. Number two, to teach us how to be like him, which is to be like Yah. And in a more practical and visible sense, to be like Hamashiach. And so how is it done? How are we to see whether or not we are living up to our true identity as the royal priesthood, kings and queens on this planet? How do we know if we have been living up to the standard? How do we know if we meet it? Well, we'll know according to the proverb. We can know based on this. Write this word down too. Parallelism. Okay? It's an important word. Parallelism. Parallelism is when you stand two things up next to each other. Zion. You call that parallel. So parallelism means when what we're gonna do is what a king does, is what a king should do, what we should do, is we should stand up Torah, and then we stand ourselves next to the Torah. That's parallelism. It's when two things are standing side by side. And what happens is the wisdom that's given to us and the knowledge, understanding that comes out of Torah, stand up to our lives and how we live and how we represent. And then at that point, we can tell whether or not we are living parallel or walking parallel to Torah, or whether we are what? Walking contrary to Torah. Parallel, that means we're walking at the path, or when we act a fool or become wicked, we find ourselves going what? Off the track. So if you're traveling and in parallelism, we are walking with Yah. I'm using this is Yah, this is us, and we're walking right parallel. We call that agreement. Okay? So you would say something like, I'm just going to pick one. There's a bunch of proverbs. We're going to get to those in a moment. But he'll say something like, a wise person will hear and increase learning, right? So that's what the Torah says. Are you wise? Are you listening? And are you increasing learning? Or are you saying, but a fool won't do that. He'll despise any kind of thing. So when Torah teaches something and you hear it, do you go, I don't like that? See? And then your life starts to go this way because you disagree with the path. You disagree with our King, who is Abba Yah, of course, made manifest through Hamashiach. Whenever we go this way, we break the parallel and we walk into wickedness. So what the proverb seeks to do for us, Zion, is to keep us running parallel with Yah by giving us all of these sayings and all of these teachings and all of this wisdom to show us even when we take one step outside of the path of righteousness. Because he's going to cover every subject you can think of, from marriage to relationships to brotherhood to economic to investments to health to Everything is covered in the proverb. And what Proverbs is doing is setting up a standard whereby we can run a parallel. It also, and I'm almost out of time for my little study today, it will also enable us when we study to look at other things around us, say like in nature, for instance, in order to see how something functions properly. And then we can look in nature around us, because there's no mother nature, we're looking at creation. Then we'll look and see whether or not we are functioning like that. So he's going to bring up things like the ant or the ostrich or the spider or whatever, things that we're able to observe. And then we're supposed to look at those things as royalty and go, okay, what is the lesson that he's trying to teach me from these particular things that are around us? Again, that's parallelism. And I'm basically, again, keeping these studies short. So I'm going to leave you with these, a couple of more insights to the word proverb, so that you won't think they're just like Aesop fables or just like good little sayings to say or something like that. No, this is literally this is how the Hebrew kings and queens passed on wisdom and knowledge to future kings and queens. So first we saw that mashal means to represent. And we also said that we not only represent, but the goal is that we might be like him and not like fools or foolish nations around us. Then we saw that it's important to understand parallelism, which means we walk according to the word. Now, the next definition, or the words, I'll just put those out. The next words I want you to understand when we study this is that you are not studying, or you and I will not be studying European wisdom. This is not European at all. You and I are not studying Hamite wisdom. This is not African proverbs, fairy tales, and mythology. This is not little mythology coming up out of Europe. So we're not going to be looking at like weird or whatever contrary wisdom. No, the wisdom that we're going to see in the book of Proverbs, because it means to represent or to be like, and obviously it has parallelism. You're looking literally at your ancient history and your ancient wisdom. It's Hebraic wisdom. This is how we taught. This is how we learned. This is how we compared ourselves with that which is righteous and that which is wicked. We used the scripture and we used the proverbs that were handed down to us by our kings, all right, and by our leaders. So therefore, you're going to see certain things, and I'm just for sake of time, you're going to see Hebrew wisdom. Then you're going to also see figurative speech, things that are a figure of something. Why? So that we can see it and then we can function accordingly. And last but not least, we're going to see that when we read these words, these lines are supposed to be thoughtful, or intended to be to us very thoughtful and also kind of catchy. Believe it or not. These words are supposed to be catchy. Why? So that you could remember them and that you can recite them and they become a part of you. Here's one. Most of you all know this. You've heard this before. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You see how you take a sentence and it has within it ethical wisdom, and it's trying to show you something about your heart. That's a whole nother lesson. But the heart is the control center. When you understand Hebrew, you understand the heart is lev, and it is the authority within. So it's not how you feel, but it's as a man, watch this, as a man has an authority within, that is what's going to control his actions on the outside. Whatever is your authority inside is going to be eventually what controls your outside. So you get those pictures, and that's what the Proverbs are. Why? Because if you're a king, but you think you're a slave, you're going to behave like a slave. If you're a king and you think you ghetto, you're going to behave ghetto. If you're a king and you think you're dumb, and the dumb is on your heart, you're going to act dumb. If you're a king, but on the inside you're miserable, then your actions are going to be miserable. You get the point? If you're a king or a queen, but on the inside you believe you are a waste or nothing, I think you're starting to get the point. So again, quick recap. Parallel, mashal means to represent. We represent Yah, our Father. To be like our King is our ultimate goal. It is to create in us parallelism so that we walk with him and not away from him. And we understand that this is very valuable to us because this wisdom was handed down to us by our kings who were also our ancestors. And they're written in such a way that we're supposed to memorize them. They're supposed to be catchy enough to where they become phrases whereby we live. One love. Got to go, Zion. Toda Rabbah for allowing us this time together. Keep us in your prayers. If these messages are helping you, consider supporting the Ark. You know how to do it. It's in the description. And go to our website also. And until we meet again, shalom.